War forgotten by history, Finland taking a stand against the U.S.S.R. Finland seized the opportunity to declare independence from Russia in 1917 when Russia was occupied with the March Revolution. Finnish communists against Finland's independence were supported by Russia, and a bloody civil war broke out. The communist rebels tried to overthrow the Finnish government, adopting a European-style parliament. The rebellion had failed. 22 years later, Joseph Stalin requested land from Finland. Stalin was concerned with Nazi expansionism and was not willing to risk Finland's land being used as a strategic advantage by Germany. Stalin was expecting Finland to accept his request. Finland took a stand for their independence. They did not abide to these proposals, a justification for war. The U.S.S.R. declared war on Finland and invaded on November 30th of 1939. Had the U.S.S.R. completely dominated Finland, the U.S.S.R. would have ruled over them. Yet only a small portion of land was taken from Finland, still holding firm to their independence. 22 years prior to the Winter War, a revolution broke out within Russia in March of 1917. This revolution was the result of resources within the country, and at the time Vladimir Lenin and his followers led the country and destroyed any opposing parties. While the country was occupied with a civil war, Finland seized the chance to become independent from Russia. Finnish communists, who were loyal to Russia, supported by Russia, attempted to overthrow the Finnish European-style parliamentary, which broke out in a civil war which resulted in the Finnish communists being defeated and gave rise to Carl Gustav Mannerheim, who later became general of the Finnish forces. The Winter War was a direct result of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of August 1939. This treaty was a 10-year period of non-aggression between Nazi Germany and Communist Russia. There was an unknown side to it, however, which stated that Russia would attack Poland in September of 1939 and would have more rights to determine its influence over Eastern Europe. After the fall of Poland in September 1939, Russia sought to extend its influence over the Baltic states, and between September and October of 1939, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia were all made to sign treaties of mutual assistance that allowed Russia to establish military bases in each of the three Baltic states. Many people assumed that Finland would be Russia's next target. The Russian army was the largest within the world at the time, with an astounding 2 million soldiers with millions more in reserves. Finland was not a threat to Russia. They were a nuisance, a small country that needed to be out of the picture. The Russians thought it was going to be a simple victory, total domination over Little Finland, with an army of only around 300,000 soldiers, including reserves. However, there was one disadvantage for the Soviets. As a result of Stalin's paranoia, he purged his army officers from 1936 to 1938. Stalin did not want any opposing authority. He accused these officers of helping Germany with a military plot within Russia. These officers were the only people left who had authority independent from Stalin, and were executed. Estimate of the total losses created by these executions ranged from 15 to 30,000 officers. Officers lost were replaced by less experienced officers. Plans made by the murdered veteran officers fell into disuse. On October 5, 1939, the U.S.S.R. invited Finnish representatives to Moscow to discuss questions about land. Stalin was concerned with Nazi expansionism and did not want land near Leningrad to be used as a strategic position by Germany if the time ever came. The U.S.S.R. were proposing that Finland move their border back from Leningrad and Finnish islands in the Gulf of Finland. Finland refused, and this was a justification of war. Mannerheim saw the inevitable war coming, so he had fortifications built along the Krilim Isthmus facing Leningrad in the summer of 1939. The Krilim Isthmus is a 100-kilometer stretch of land located between the Gulf of Finland and Lake Ladoga. The fortifications were meant to defend against any aggressive attacks by the U.S.S.R. On November 28th of 1939, the U.S.S.R. broke off diplomatic relations with Finland, and 2 days later, on November 30th, the U.S.S.R. invaded Finland. The Nazis blocked the shipment of arms to the Finns, threatening Sweden with war if Sweden allowed transit of arms from the West, and blocking arms from every other nation that tried to help the Finns. The U.S.S.R. advances were planned as an overwhelming onslaught to attack everywhere at once. On November 30th, the U.S.S.R. bombed Helsinki. This was a great victory for the U.S.S.R. The U.S.S.R. thought they could simply use their aerial and naval power to force the Finnish into surrender. When winter came, dangerously cold temperatures disabled the U.S.S.R.'s ability to use aerial and naval power. The Winter War took place in one of the coldest winters in Finland's history, with temperatures plunging anywhere from -40 to -50 degrees Fahrenheit. Finnish soldiers were more organized and ready for the cold in contrast to the Russian soldiers.
It was so cold that when a man was shot, his circulation would stop and his entire body would freeze only after a few minutes. The Russians were so ill-equipped for the war, as said by Commander Zelentov of the 163rd Rifle Brigade. No clothes, no food, no camo, inadequate discipline, and training. The Russians' meals consisted of nothing more than some bread and some black tea, while the Finnish had meals that were high in protein and in fat to keep them energized and warm. The Finnish soldiers also rotated, giving every soldier a chance to get a nice warm meal. And on December 10th, a Soviet battalion marched in silence to the snowy woods near the village of Tarvajarvi, prepared to capture a crucial Finnish supply position. The attack was almost flawless. Finnish personnel here were few, and many were non-military. It looked as if the Soviets had achieved a significant victory. It was not until they reached the field kitchens that they encountered problems. They froze, they lowered their weapons, and charged for the field kitchens full of sausage soup. This gave time for a Finnish colonel to round up his men, including the chefs, and counterattack, virtually wiping out the Soviet soldiers. The Finnish were also more maneuverable. A lot of Finnish soldiers would maneuver around on skis while the Russians would have to walk through deep snow. In fact, the Finnish army had certain ski troopers equipped with crowbars dedicated to prying the tracks off of enemy tanks. And on December 7th, the Russian 163rd Rifle Brigade were escorting large amounts of supplies straight to the middle of Finland in hopes of cutting off the Finnish army. This U.S.S.R. advance consisted of more than 20,000 men and stretched over 8 miles. The Finnish troops would use smaller units of ski troopers to cut the massive U.S.S.R. advance into smaller pieces and pick them off, completely shattering the Russian formation. By the time it was January of 1940, the morale of the Russian forces had been depleted. It was time to regroup and rethink strategies. Stalin brought in General Timoshenko. Timoshenko reorganized his forces for a massive offensive that consisted of around 750,000 soldiers, 3,500 artillery guns, and over 100 fighters. All this was focused on the Karelian Isthmus. The Red Army could not be contained at the Mannerheim Line. The Finnish were pushed back to the city of Viborg. The Finnish desperately tried to hold the line. By March 12th of 1940, the Finns were almost out of ammo, and on March 13th of 1940, an armistice was signed. The war was over. Finland's borders were pushed back, but it was not completely occupied, which was going to happen had the U.S.S.R. completely dominated Finland. Finland was still able to live as a free, independent nation.
The impact on Finland was minimal. The only land the Finnish had to surrender to the Russians was land directly on their border. Land near Leningrad would have to be pushed back. Much of the Karelian Isthmus was taken by Russians, totaling to 12% of Finland's land. The Finnish were able to sign a treaty with the Russians, which allowed them to live normal lives. The Russians' troop confidence had been crippled. The Finnish showed the Russians how to fight a war. Estimates of the casualties for the Soviets range from 45 to 150,000, with 20 to 30,000 soldiers injured.
Finland won, because had Finland lost, she would have been occupied by the Soviets, and she would have been like Estonia, which actually gave way to Stalin's demands and was occupied. And so in this sense, Finland won, obviously.
In addition, the Germans were astonished at how badly the Soviets performed in the Winter War, a performance that made them believe they could turn on Stalin before finishing off the stubborn Brits in the West. In June of 1941, Hitler launched an attack known as Operation Barbarossa. This attack stunned Stalin, resulting in heavy losses for the Red Army in the first days of the battle. Stalin was able to pull through and fight off Hitler's military plot, ultimately leading to the downfall of Hitler's murderous regime.
The U.S.S.R. army outnumbered the Finnish army 6-1 with far more military power. The Finnish army took a stand against the U.S.S.R. The U.S.S.R. was not prepared for the type of war that the Finnish were going to fight. The Russians were ill-equipped in their rations, discipline, and training. The U.S.S.R. eventually broke the Finnish defenses, but it came with heavy casualties. The Finnish were able to sign a peace treaty with the U.S.S.R. and keep their way of life that only gave up a small portion of land as a consequence. Even though they were outmatched in every aspect, the Finnish took a stand and fought for their land and their way of life.